Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary with a knife video. Today I've got a new Kershaw for 2016. This is the Kershaw Grid, and this is a knife that puts me in mind of a few other Kershaws, okay? I see this and I kind of am reminded of the Link, I'm reminded of the Cryo 2, even the Ferrite that's out this year. It's sort of the gray with the modified drop point blade, almost a Warncliffe style blade. This is bigger than all of those, and so I like that. This is lighter in terms of, or lighter for size, okay? I think it's fairly close in weight to some of those, but they're all over 5 ounces, and this is just under 5 ounces. So for all those reasons, you know, I wanted to check this out and see if this was a knife that was a really budget-friendly knife that was really well done. And overall, it's pretty well done. Okay, I'm not going to say it's like the greatest knife ever, but it's not a bad blade at all. The problem I see with this one is in this price category, so $31 is the price, there are so many great blades that you've got to compete with that a knife really needs to stand out and do something different. And this one kind of does and kind of doesn't. So let me share the details with you, and we'll kind of key in on some of those things that to me are a little disappointing about this knife, and we'll also key in on those things that are really well done. And the first thing we want to talk about is something really well done, and that is size and weight. This knife is 8 3/8 inches, over 3.5 inch blade, just over 3 9/16, 4 3/4 inch handle, and very slim in pocket. This knife is under 3/8 of an inch in thickness. So all of those things are very, very good. And for 4.8, 4.9 ounces, that's a win, I think, in terms of how much knife you're getting for the amount that you have to carry. I know some of you are saying, but Kevin, I have this knife or that knife that, you know, is bigger than that or as big as that, but weighs less. A pair of two would be a good example. But those are not stainless steel frame locks, and they're not coming in at the same budget price as this is coming in at. So stainless steel frame lock, it's hard to get them down to a decent weight, and that's generally why I avoid them. But this one I thought I wanted to check out. Now, let's do some comparisons so you kind of see how big that, you know, 8 3/8 is when you compare it to a few other blades. I've got a few Kershaws here. I tried to focus on Kershaws. So here's a Kershaw blur. This is the S30V blur. Not comparable in terms of price point, but you could find a blur for around $45, so about 15 bucks more than this. And it is quite a bit shorter. So, okay, you've got to kind of be aware of that. There you go, that's how it compares to a blur. Now, the size, I've got another budget-friendly Kershaw here. This is the CQC 4K, and if you remember in this video, I was really, really a big fan of this knife, and I still am. That's how the Grid compares to the 4K. We may bring this one back in for another comparison when we get down to the handle. Another assisted opening knife, here's a SOG Zoom. All right, now the Zoom again is going to cost you a little bit more than the Grid, but it's, you know, it's within the realm of possibility. I think you'd probably pick these up for 45 bucks or so, and the Grid is like 31. A knife that does compare well in terms of price point is the Ontario Utilitac, and the Rat would be the same idea here. It's a little bit, well, I guess they're about the same size. Maybe the Utilitac is a teeny bit smaller. Again, though, great knife. Heavier, of course, but not by a lot. Very, very close in weight. This is, of course, a liner lock, not a frame lock. So there are some comparable knives that you can kind of give you an idea of size, and also knives that you may want to look at if you're looking in this price point. Now, that's, you know, one of the challenges with this price point, there are literally thousands of knives from all kinds of companies competing in this price point, and that makes it difficult, especially for me to try and show you some comparable stuff. It's like, I don't even know where to start. But those are a few blades that, some from Kershaw, some from elsewhere, that are similar in cost, similar in function, and even maybe in size and weight. Let's go ahead and get into the details on this, and I'll zoom in on the blade so we can talk about that first. Okay, there we go. So there we are in a closer up view of this Kershaw Grid. You can see that sort of modified drop point blade. It's a hollow grind. It does have the this black coating on it, and Kershaw calls it, they have a specific name for it, black oxide coating. There you go. Kershaw calls it a black oxide coating. It's actually held up fairly well, and I've done quite a bit of harder cutting. I cut a lot of wood and did a lot of carving with this, and I had a specific reason for that I'll tell you about in a second, but the coating has held up pretty well. Now eventually, any black coated blade, even DLC coating, which stands up the best, is going to, if you get a bad scratch or really heavy use, you are going to wear off pretty well any coating that comes on a blade. But for now, it looks really sharp. And overall, you know what I mean, a blade with some wear on it, I still think looks pretty cool, because it just shows that this is a knife that's been used and has been very, very, very useful to the owner. Let's see, 8CR13 MOV blade steel, hollow grind. The 8CR13 MOV is going to be a decent steel. Yeah, you're probably going to have to sharpen it or strop it frequently, but it's good for a budget steel. Now I will say this, by putting on this coating on what's already a stainless steel, you do get a blade that's going to be fairly corrosion resistant. Same with the handle, right? Unless you scrape this coating off, this is not going to rust easily because of the fact that it's coated, so there's not much that can rust. And the edge, presumably you're using the edge, so as I say, a used tool does not rust. So I like this blade shape, fairly utilitarian blade shape, good thin edge geometry. It is a hollow grind, which you guys know I love. About the only thing that I couldn't see using this knife for is any kind of skinning task. And that's primarily because you'd end up using the tip a lot, which is not. The belly here is sort of an overall gentle belly, and it's just not going to function well for skinning. Otherwise, though, this is going to be a really useful blade that's going to do pretty well anything you want to do with it fairly well. The edge geometry being fairly thin also, in my opinion, means that you're going to, perceived sharpness is going to be better over time. All right, so there you go. That's the blade. I think a totally passable blade here. It's not some kind of super steel or anything like that, but definitely for the price point is going to serve you very well. What about lockup and deployment? Well, this is a stainless steel frame lock. Okay, so that's a fairly standard lock. Probably most of you are familiar. I will point out that there's no over travel stop on this, which was a little surprising. It's hard to find a Kershaw that doesn't have that, but in this case, yeah, no over travel stop at all. Not that that's an issue. I've used this quite a bit. I've used it with gloves on quite a bit and have not had any issues with that lock, overextending or anything like that. It seems to be fine to me. The Speed Safe, I've often said this before, I think the Kershaw Speed Safe is about the best assisted opening mechanism out there, although I know there have been problems with the torsion bars breaking, and I did have a torsion bar go in my Cryo 2 I should say, and that's not a big deal. Kershaw will send you out and you can send you out a new one, and they're pretty easy to just drop back in. Okay, so Speed Safe assisted opening, very fast, very solid. The lockup, by the way, is very, very good, and there's no up and down or side to side play, and that's, on a budget knife, I always think that's good. The lockup is fairly late, but it is stainless steel. So, I prefer steel on steel, and in my mind, when you have steel on steel, you're not going to get the same kind of wear as you would get with titanium on steel. So the lateness of the lockup is not as big of an issue, although this is past, I'd say it's about 60% lockup. Really, on a stainless steel frame lock, that's not a big deal. And it pretty well came like that from the factory and has not moved. So again, that's a good sign. If you're a person who likes to flip your knives and play with them, it is very easy both to actuate with the flipper mechanism, okay, as well as with the thumb studs. Okay, both work just fine. It's also comfortable on your hands. The lock bar doesn't have any kind of crazy jimping or anything that's going to eat up your thumb. Very comfortable, very fun to play with this knife. You'll have no issues with that. Now I will say this, the relief cut in this lock bar is extremely thin, okay? And I pointed that out. That's one of the things I wanted to point out with the, if you remember in this video, I talked about this relief cut being extremely thin as well. And when you're dealing with, neither of these have super thick, it's not like you've got a 1/4 inch of steel here that you're trying to bend. The relief cut to me did not have to be this thin. And in fact, I would have been happy to have to push just a little bit harder on that lock bar to have a thicker relief cut and therefore more strength in that lock bar. But that said, it's not the end of the world, and in everyday regular use, you know, you're not going to care about that. The other thing is, should this lock bar ever fail completely, when you're holding the knife, you know, let me try to unlock it. There you go. When you're holding the knife, you can see that the finger choil, or the flipper mechanism, is going to protect you from closing the knife on your hand. That's not the end of the world, okay? Very, very solid though, very fast lockup. All of that is very well done. And it is also quite smooth. So before you get to the torsion bar engages around this point, and you can see that it is quite smooth until you get to that point where the torsion bar kicks in. All right, so that's lockup and deployment. Let me back up a little bit. Oh, let me show you one thing on the handle before we go. I want you to see the two handle scales here. Notice that they're quite thin, and in fact the lock side is thinner than the show side, okay? And I'm going to speak to that in a second. Let me back up. There we go. Okay, so there's the knife in hand, and I wanted to be able to kind of demonstrate this for you. It's in hand, you've got lots of real estate. There's no problem with that. In lots of different grips, it feels about the same. But here's where this knife kind of doesn't do as well as I'd hoped. And that is in the comfort department. If you're not wearing gloves and if you do a lot of heavy cutting, I did a bunch of wood carving purposely because, you know, wood carving requires you to really bear down and do a bunch of sort of whittling like this. This knife does get a little uncomfortable, okay? And I think that all that's happened here is that you see this cut on the top and on the top and even on the bottom to a lesser extent. They've just gone a little too thin. It's one of those things where, you know, a fraction of an inch makes a big difference. Let me show you the CQC 4K. The steel on both of these is about the same thickness. Okay, if I put these two side by side. The steel side on both is very, very similar in size. This steel does not offer any issues in terms of digging into your hand. This one does, okay? And all it is that they've kind of gone with a different cut here, and it ends up making it pretty uncomfortable in hand for really, really hard tasks. And that's when I felt it the first time, I was like, I wonder if that would be uncomfortable. So I purposely went out and did a bunch of wood carving and stuff without any gloves on, and it is a little uncomfortable. So that's my biggest hit against this knife. I think it's so close to being awesome, but they've just gone a little too thin with that cut, and in that way, they've ended up making this knife pretty uncomfortable. Now, in terms of retention in hand, I don't have any issues. Now, I will say the jimping here does nothing at all. And again, I've said this about a bunch of knives lately. I wish if they're going to put jimping here, they would leave at least the full blade width. Now, you don't have a super thick blade stock on this to begin with, but if they left the full thickness here, it would have given me at least a little more comfort with my thumb. All right, so that's my biggest issue with this. Now, this knife I think is going to serve you well. I will say, let me kind of go the other way now. When I did all that hard cutting, I was really bearing down. I didn't get the lock bar engaging over. I didn't get lock stick happening, which often is the case when you really bear down on a blade. You know, you're putting pressure back this way, which allows the lock bar to slip over that way, and it can cause things to get a little uncomfortable. Not so with this. It held up really well. Or I mean, it can cause this to stick quite badly, and that did not happen at all. It just became a little uncomfortable over time. Now, let's be honest. I had to go out of my way to have that happen. Under normal use, I think this handle is fine. It's just for those more what would you say, hard use, where you're really bearing down, where you really got to hold on, things can get a little less than comfortable. All right. So otherwise, I think the handle is pretty well done. There are some light machining marks on this on the lock side. And for some reason, by the way, it is pillar construction, it is Torx construction. With any budget-friendly knife, you can get screws stripping. But here's the thing, with a Kershaw, they are great. And I've done this a number of times. I've had a few zero tolerances. I've had a few Kershaws where a screw stripped or the pivot screw didn't work the way I wanted it to. And it's literally as simple as an email. Send Kershaw an email. They send the parts right out. They come usually faster than I've expected. I've had other companies who I've asked for parts, and sometimes they just refuse. Spyderco won't send you much of anything. Other times I've said, sure, we'll send that out, but it takes a long, long time. Kershaw is quick, and they will get you those screws if one ever goes on you, no problem. So that is one of those, I think, they deserve credit where credit is due. Kershaw's warranty that way is fantastic. So there you go. That's my take. Oh yeah, so let's get to overall impressions, finally. Overall impressions on this knife. By the way, no lanyard hole. Better before I take off and forget about the handle discussion. There's no lanyard hole, but look here at the bottom. There's plenty of room that you could put a lanyard around this bottom standoff and have no chance of the blade touching it, okay? So lots of room there for a lanyard if you're a lanyard guy. I'm just not one. So overall impressions, I think for the price point, which is very good, 30 bucks for a fairly well-made knife is excellent, okay? So very budget friendly. They have made some improvements to my mind over the Cryo 2. So if you kind of were like me and you liked the Cryo 2 but wanted it to be a little bigger, a little more versatile because of the smaller blade shape, and even a little lighter, I think this is a great knife for you. Yeah, the handle is a little, they've achieved a great weight and they've achieved a very slim handle, but they've just gone a little too far with that. I would take an extra fraction of an ounce. If it went from 4.8 to 5.1 ounces, I don't think that would be the end of the world to get just a little more comfort, okay? But otherwise, I think this is a really good knife, very comparable to a lot of other Kershaws. And so if you've liked other budget Kershaws, I don't think you would be disappointed with this. There you go, guys. That's my take on the Kershaw Grid. Certainly for the money, not a bad knife. The competition is stiff at this price point, though. My only complaint is just a little bit of discomfort. It could be more ergonomic. There you go. Talk to you soon.